Hello everyone, my name is Liz. Welcome to my library, and today I'm going to be sharing with you all of the books that I read in the month of February. February was my birthday month. I posted a huge birthday haul recently, so I read 12 books this month. That sounds like a lot. 5 of them are graphic novels. I've just been finding that reading is really a huge comfort to me right now. It's also a sort of a stimulation, if that makes sense. Like it's giving me something to think about, something to get lost in that is an escape, I guess you could say. So I'm sure you guys can all relate to that. So without further ado, let's get into the books that I read in the month of February. The first book that I started in January and finished in February is The Midnight Club by Christopher Pike. I've never read anything by Christopher Pike before. This was a first, and I got this because of the Netflix series. It says coming to Netflix, but it's already out. It's been out for a couple of years. It's called The Midnight Club. It's directed by Mike Flanagan. So that's why I got this book, because of the Netflix show, which I watched and I enjoyed. And I thought, I'm curious about the book. So I've had this in my collection for a while. I finally just picked it up and read it. And I give it 3 out of 5 stars. So I actually, honestly, I almost DNF'd this. I was prepared to not finish this because the main character, her name is Ilanka. She's very, very, very insufferable. Like, she's very difficult to understand at first. The story jumps right into her life, and we don't really get any context. We don't really get any buildup. It's just right into her story. And the story, for those of you who don't know, is about teenagers who are all terminally ill with various forms of cancer. They are all living at this beautiful old mansion of a house on the ocean side. It's like overlooking the ocean, and it's a hospice house. It's a hospice center, but it's a really beautiful house. And I say that because I love books that are set in beautiful houses like that, with like old sort of like spookiness to them or something like that. It's not played up really a lot in the book, but it is an element that I really enjoy. The kids, obviously, in this hospice, all knowing that they're going to die, they bond and they form this midnight club. And the midnight club is they meet at midnight and they all share stories. Usually they're scary stories. In the show, the stories are a little bit different than they are in the book. So obviously this book has some really heavy themes. It has kids dying of cancer. Cancer is a super heavy theme that has been showing up in a lot of media I've been consuming lately for whatever reason. And it's not a light topic. It's not easy, and so that's something to think about. When this book opens, Ilanka is kind of bratty. She's kind of insufferable, and she's in love with Kevin, one of the other kids at the hospice. She has this very entitled attitude towards her love for him, as if she feels like she deserves him. And he has a girlfriend, and she just treats the girlfriend, she views the girlfriend as if Ilanka herself is superior to the girlfriend. And that was really the part that kind of turned me off. I felt like it didn't really make sense, and I just felt really irritated with the character. But I kind of pushed myself to read through the first short story. And once I got into that, I got into the book. And I will say that the behavior of Ilanka, I mean, obviously, the behavior of anyone who finds out that they're dying of cancer is going to be, they're entitled to behave and feel however they want. I can't imagine what that would be like, especially as a teenager with your whole life ahead of you, learning that you're going to die and having to process that, and then finding what feels like love and how do you navigate that. Like, it's got to be very confusing. And so it does kind of make sense. It does kind of make sense why she is that way. I just didn't think it was done in the best way, especially in the beginning. But I did enjoy this book. I'm glad I read it. All of the short stories were very interesting. All of the characters I ended up just being in love with by the end of the book. Like, I really felt like these characters, I knew them. It was very character driven, I think. I mean, there really wasn't much plot. There was a lot of short stories, and then there was getting to know all of the characters as they approach their deaths. There's a bit of a supernatural element to this story, maybe even like spiritual, I would say. It's not specifically religious, but it has a supernatural slash spiritual element to it. That's all I'm going to say, because I don't want to ruin anything. And like I said, I haven't read any Christopher Pike before, but I have read reviews on this book, and people have said that that supernatural, spiritual element is in a lot of his other books, I think. So let me know if you've read, if you're familiar with this author and you know what I'm talking about. It was a little bit confusing for me, the way that it was presented, but I did get it. I got what he was trying to say. So I'm not in a huge hurry to read anything else by this author anytime soon, but since I've had this book in my collection for a few years, I am glad that I finally read it. Next up, I read The Testaments by Margaret Atwood. This is the sequel to The Handmaid's Tale. I really enjoyed this book. I know it's getting a lot of flack. I couldn't help but notice that a lot of people are criticizing this book pretty heavily. They just didn't enjoy it. They didn't like it. They didn't feel like it was necessary. And I can't speak to that because I read The Handmaid's Tale for the first time in January. So The Handmaid's Tale is not a book that I grew up knowing. Like a lot of people read it in high school or whatever. And it came out in the 80s. So some people have, since the 80s, have looked at The Handmaid's Tale as this pivotal piece of literature. And so when you compare this to that, it's very different. And a lot of people were kind of let down, or again, they didn't feel like it added anything to that story. That's fine. I really enjoyed this book. I also enjoyed The Handmaid's Tale, and I'm really glad that I read both of them. And I don't want to focus too much on other people's negative critiques. I don't want this video to be me just like reacting to other people's negativity. I want this to be my thoughts, but I did want to address that because it's just always on my mind. If I like something that somebody else doesn't like, I feel like I have to defend it. Just naturally, that's how I feel. This book follows three different characters. One of them is Aunt Lydia from The Handmaid's Tale. The other one of them lives in Gilead, which is the dystopian society that is very controlling of everybody, but very, very, very controlling of women, and their fertility is down. So they use handmaids as basically a human vessel to try to give babies to the wealthy families. So there's lots of violence and discrimination against women. It's very interesting and relevant themes in my opinion, but no way could I cover it all right now in this video. But it has three main characters, and the three main characters, it shows their individual lives, and then eventually their lives converge and how they all react to the situations going on in Gilead. There's a lot of ties into the original book. Does it change the original book? I didn't think it changed it too much. It changes it a little bit. I did actually have to go back and reread a couple of parts just reading this, just to kind of refresh my memory, even though I had just read it. One thing I liked about this book was that we got to see different perspectives than we did in The Handmaid's Tale. In The Handmaid's Tale, it was all Offred's perspective, our main character, the handmaid. And in this book, we have perspective of a girl who is the daughter of a wealthy family. So we see kind of a perspective of someone who maybe at first at least doesn't see Gilead as being so bad. They're kind of raised with the propaganda, brainwashed to believe that it's a good thing. And then we see Aunt Lydia, who is one of the women whose job it is to control all of the other women, all of the handmaids. We see her perspective. And then we see someone who lives in Canada, which is not part of Gilead. And so we see their perspective of life as looking at Gilead from an outside perspective. So we get different perspectives, which is really interesting and fun. I thought I liked it. And she does add a few modern elements. Again, The Handmaid's Tale was written in the 80s, so there's a lot of elements that are not in that book that would be relevant now. And she kind of interweaves some of that into this book. I'm going to recommend it. I gave it 4 out of 5 stars. I enjoyed it. Was it perfect? Probably not, but I'm really glad I read it, and I could definitely see myself reading both of those again. This book I have is one that I did a complete review on. I don't think that video's up yet, but it will be up very soon. It's Yellowface by R F Kuang. I love this book. It was so good. I'm not going to talk too much about it. I will tell you, though, this is the first book that I've ever read in the shower. At a certain point, I could not put it down. It was gripping. It's fairly fast paced. It is just so good. The themes of this book are cultural appropriation and racism, as well as social media and cancel culture, which are very interesting themes to me, very relevant in my opinion. And I found that she handled them very well. The story is very good. So I think the best way I can sum this up quickly is to say it follows an aspiring writer, a white woman, who makes a lot of unethical decisions in an attempt to become a successful writer. So I gave this book 5 out of 5 stars, and I did say that it was probably in the running for one of my favorite books of the year. I think that I have another book that will be on that list in today's video, but I still really do feel like this was an amazing book and I loved it. So definitely recommend you read Yellowface, but like I said, I'll have a full video talking about that coming out very soon. Next up was actually a reread for me, although I forgot that I had already read it until I was reading it and I was like, nope, yep, I definitely read this. I remember reading this. That is The Giver by Lois Lowry. I try to do young adult and middle grade books often in my reading just because I do have kids. I have four kids. I have a 14-year-old, a 7-year-old, a 4-year-old, and a 2-year-old. So I'm very interested in literature, not only for myself, but for them. And the 14-year-old is right at that point where she's above middle grade, really into young adult, and even just some straight up adult fiction. So I'm always interested in books that I can recommend to her and also books that I can put on my homeschooling shelf for the future for my younger kids. So, The Giver. Actually, the reason I wanted to read this was because of the dystopian nature. I'm working on reading a bunch of dystopian novels and maybe doing a video on just the genre of dystopian fiction and why we love it and why I particularly love it. So I wanted to read this, and it was a really quick read. It takes place in this sort of idyllic community, supposedly idyllic community, and the main character's name is Jonas, and he's a boy. I think he's about 12, maybe, because I think as he turns 12, he goes through this assignment where all the kids are assigned basically their future jobs at age 12, and Jonas's job is something that no one's ever heard of and he doesn't know what it is. And we follow him as he learns. And it's this sort of secret, it's sort of this way that the community has found to repress everybody else's memory of the past and of any other life other than what they're living now. And I really love the way this is written. Lois Lowry did a really good job. I listened to an interview of hers where she talked about how she really wanted this book to start out at least with the community seeming so idyllic that you actually almost want to live there. And I actually did find that. It was when the family, there's a mother and a father and a brother and a sister, right? Jonas and his sister, and they all every night at dinner sit and share their feelings. I feel so dopey saying that, but they sit and share their feelings and it's like mandatory, but they all do it in a very loving way and they're seemingly very open and honest about their feelings. When one of them says something negative, the rest of them come and support and comfort each other, and it just seemed like a really beautiful thing, you know? Maybe that tells you what I need more of in my life. But I did have that feeling of, gosh, this community isn't so bad. What's so bad about this? This is actually really nice. And then, of course, shortly thereafter, you realize it's not really nice. It's not perfect. It is very, very flawed. And there's a great cost to that idyllic seeming nature of the community. So, anyways, have you read The Giver? Did you enjoy it? What do you think? I did give this one 5 out of 5 stars. Next, I have a book that I don't really know how to introduce it, so I'm just going to tell you. This is The Outsiders, written by S. E. Hinton. This book was first published in 1967. So, this book is about teenagers. Again, it's about teenagers. I'm noticing a lot of books about teenagers that I read this month. It's a popular genre. It's not a genre, but it's popular to have teenagers in your books because teenagers just tell stories in a way that a lot of people can relate to. So the main character in this book, his name is Pony Boy, and yes, that is his real name. His brother's name is Soda Pop. His other brother's name is Dairy, and these boys are kind of a broken family. Their parents have both died in a car crash, and Dairy's the oldest. I think he's 20 years old, and he decided not to go to college in order to basically work and raise his little brothers. And Soda Pop, who's the middle, also dropped out of high school. Ponyboy's the only one still in school. He's very smart, but they're very much living in poverty, and they live in a very divided community where they are known as greasers and the other half of the community is known as socias. The socias are like the rich kids. They're very privileged. They drive fancy cars. They have nice clothes. And, you know, and greaser, it's one of those terms that like they call each other greasers, but if someone else outside of their group calls them a greaser, then it's an insult, you know? This story just follows their lives. There's a lot of violence. Their violence is like a daily occurrence. It's just part of everyday life for these kids. And it's really sad. There's a lot of sadness. I mean, I cried. I cried a lot during this book, but I highly recommend it. It's very, very good. I would probably give this 5 stars. I swear I'm not like an easy grader when it comes to books, but I do pick books that I know I'm probably going to like. At least this month I did. This one is really well done. S C Hinton is actually a woman, and she wrote this book based off of her own experiences, and she went by this name. I'm pretty sure she went by S C Hinton because she didn't want to be identified as a woman because obviously the characters in this book are mostly all boys. So I found that interesting. That was just a little bit interesting bit of trivia. But there's another book by this author that I do own that I'm hoping to read very soon. But The Outsiders, it was really good. I enjoyed it. There is a movie. It came out in the 80s and it has a whole bunch of amazing, it has an amazing cast of actors that now are like very big. Several like Tom Cruise, Patrick Swayze, um, Rob Lowe, and probably a few others I can't think of right now. They all went on to do big things, but they're very, very young in this movie. And it's very well cast too, based on the characters. Like, this is, I think, what we would call a character driven book. And I will say in the very beginning, I almost got a little bit confused because there was so much focus on the characters, introducing them, their names, their physical appearance. And I felt like it was kind of hard for me to get into because of that. But then I also found myself referring back to that part of the book a lot just to kind of refresh my memory as I got to know the characters and their behavior, like what they were supposed to look like again and stuff. Oh, and then another thing that was just nitpicky of me that bothered me about this book is that two of the characters, so I told you that the oldest brother's name is Derry. There's another character, so Derry is short for Daryl. There's another character name is Dallas that goes by Dally. So there's a Derry and a Dally, and they're both like part of the group. And I struggled with that so much. Just like the double consonant and then the DA and the Y at the end, like it's too similar for me. I struggled a lot with that. That's the only thing I struggled with in this book, other than the material being really sad. But I just felt like I had to say that because I don't know if it's the ADHD or what it is, but that was really hard for me to keep track of who is who. Um, Other than that, though, this book is awesome and I definitely recommend it. Next, I have 5 books to talk about. I'm going to talk about them all at once. I think I'm actually going to do a separate video on these. Heartstopper. This series is a work of art. I wish I had books like this when I was a kid. If you're not familiar, this is so I actually have all 5 of the books, but these are actually my daughter's. She got these for her birthday or Christmas. She got these recently. She read them in like 2 hours and reread them, and she really loved them. And then a few weeks ago, I was like, hey, can I borrow these? I remember reading the first one when she first got it, and I got through like half of it in like 20 minutes. And I was like, okay, so not only is this a relevant book, but it's books that I can read pretty quickly. So these books are written by Alice Oseman. It follows 2 main characters, Nick and Charlie. And they are 2 boys that meet and fall in love and eventually end up dating. And that's all I want to say because it is kind of a slow progression. Obviously, it's a romance, but the first book is pretty much just them kind of being friends and setting up things. So obviously this series has a strong LGBTQ plus theme, and it's very well done. It's very informative, and you can just tell that Alice Oseman is very informed. She's educated. She knows what she's talking about. I don't know much about her, and I feel kind of stupid talking about this, realizing I should have done more research on her, which I will when I do my video. But I just want to say, like, this is the kind of book that I wish I had had when I was growing up. I wish all of my friends had had these books, and not just because the characters are queer, although that is really important to have representation of that. There's other topics that they cover that I just feel like were not talked about or covered well in the media that I was consuming when I was a teenager. They talk a lot about mental health. They talk about kids' relationships with their parents. They talk about bullying. They talk about a little bit about like self-harm and eating disorders, which ties into the mental health aspect of it. They talk about just dating and having crushes and what do you do if when you don't know if somebody likes you back. They talk about the difference between being gay, being bisexual. They talk about asexuality. There's a trans character in this book. There's just a lot of awesome representation in this series that is so important for our kids to be seeing. So I read the first 4 books of the series in like 2 days, and then I ordered the 5th book because I didn't realize there was a 5th book that was out yet, but there is. And so then I ordered that and read that in a day. And there's actually a 6th book that is coming out. It's not out yet, it's coming out. So hopefully I will get my video out on these 5, and then when the 6th one comes out, I can do a video on that as well. So yes, if you haven't checked out Heartstopper, I highly recommend that you do. Oh, and the 5th book has them talking about colleges. I feel like this is a really good series for parents to maybe have like a door open for their kids. Like as I was reading this, knowing that my daughter read them, I felt like there was a lot of things I wanted to talk to her about, and it was a really good opening. I'm in love, absolutely obsessed, and I'm planning on reading Solitaire, which is a novel by Alice Oseman with the same characters, focusing I think on Charlie's sister rather than Nick and Charlie, but I'm hoping to read that one soon. My daughter has that one. She also has the Nick and Charlie. Is it a novella or a graphic novel? I don't know. She has those. I'm going to probably be reading those soon too. But yeah, that's Heartstopper. 5 out of 5. All right. Next is a book that is in the running with Yellowface for my favorite book of the year, The Seven Husbands of Evelyn Hugo. This book was so captivating. It's so well written. It is almost perfection. I feel like it was almost like made for me. So the protagonist in this book is Monique. Well, there's two protagonists, right? There's Monique, who is an aspiring journalist, or she is a journalist. She works for a publishing company, but she's not very high up in the company. She's trying to work her way up. And Evelyn Hugo is a movie star, and Evelyn Hugo's team reaches out to publishing company and specifically asked for Monique to interview Evelyn Hugo for an upcoming event, a charity event that she's doing. When Monique gets there, though, she realizes quickly that Evelyn Hugo doesn't actually plan on doing an interview for that event. She basically wants to give Monique her life story, and she wants Monique to write her memoir. The reasons why sort of unfold throughout the book, so I'm not going to get into that, but that's the setup. And then most of the book goes in flashbacks of Evelyn Hugo's life, starting when she was a teenager, going through all seven of her husbands and a lot of other life stuff along the way. Monique is a biracial woman, and as you may know, I'm a biracial woman. She's actually the same as me. Her dad is black and her mom is white, which is the same case for me. So right off the bat, I felt a connection. And her being a biracial woman actually figures into the theme of the story quite heavily. And that I really connected with that. Like I could really relate to a lot of things they were saying about that. For example, feeling like you're never black enough when you're around other black people. I don't know how Taylor Jenkins Reid is so good at giving a voice to so many different people, but she did an amazing job, and it really hit home for me. It was really something that I could relate to and something that I have experienced, and it was just awesome to see that represented. I have a lot more to say on this, but it'll be in a different video. 5 out of 5 stars for sure. Okay, next, this book I read in 24 hours. I didn't mean to. It was really good. It hooked me, and I had to know. I had to know how it was going to end. It's Victorian Psycho by Virginia Feito. I would say this book is squarely in the horror genre. It's very gruesome. It's kind of gross, actually. And yes, it takes place in the Victorian era, but if you are expecting like a warm, cozy, if you're expecting the setting to be like romantic and cozy and gothic, it's gothic, but it's not pretty. There's a lot of talk about like chamber pots in this book and the contents of them and all the gross things that they eat, and there's maggots, and there's just it's gross. And I just say that because for me that's one of my triggers. I have a very sensitive gag reflex. This triggered that a few times. I had to kind of like skim, like my eyes kind of like got glassy and I kind of glazed over a few sentences just because it was just a lot of gross description that made me feel like I was going to throw up. So I don't think that's going to have the effect for everybody. I think a lot of people would probably enjoy that because, again, it's horror. You want that kind of uncomfortable, squeamish feeling. It was a little bit too much for me, though. But other than that, I really enjoyed it. The character was amazing. The protagonist was so well done. And I really hope they make a movie out of this one. It's hard to give you the premise without giving too much away, but basically, it follows a woman who is essentially a psychopath, and we're in her mind. It's kind of like if you took the show You or American Psycho, and it was a woman in the Victorian age, but she's not really obsessed romantically with anyone, but she is kind of obsessed. Anyways, I don't want to give too much of it away, but it was a quick read, and this is a new one. This came out this year, so I'm excited to have like a recent release under my belt too that I've read. I think I gave this book 4 out of 5 stars because I really enjoyed it, and I definitely want to read more from this author. All right, the last book I literally read, this is a short story collection. I read the last one of these this morning. I've never read anything like this. This is called Apocalypse Still, and it's by Leah Nicole Whitcomb. Leah Nicole Whitcomb is actually a YouTuber, and that's how I discovered this book was her YouTube channel. She's a booktuber. I just came upon her channel recently, and she mentions the books that she's published, and this one just sounded right up my alley. So it's an apocalyptic anthology of short stories, and they all take place in different scenarios revolving around Black people, specifically Black women, and apocalyptic scenarios. There's also like a supernatural, maybe like sci fi element to a lot of them. There's aliens in one story, there's zombies in another story, there's time travel, and there's a lot of horror. This reminds me of something that would be in like an anthology series on Netflix or something. And I really hope that they do. I don't know how likely that is, but that would be amazing. These stories are really, I didn't feel like the writing itself was super tight. I felt like it was really good. And once I got into the story, I was really into the story. But once in a while, there would be some element of the writing that just kind of didn't flow right or kind of took me out a little bit, but it wasn't that bad. Again, I if it was that bad, I wouldn't have finished it. The stories themselves were amazing, well written, and I cannot wait to read more from Leah Nicole Wickham. Fantastic. Highly recommend Apocalypse Still. All right, that is everything I read in the month of February. What did you read this month? Did you read any of the same books I read? That would be really cool if you did. Or have you read any of these books in the past? What do you think I should read next month? I do have a long TBR, but as you know, my TBR can never be too long. So if you have a suggestion, please let me know. I appreciate that. And with that, thank you so much for watching. I really appreciate you guys, and I'll talk to you again very soon. Bye.